Hi everyone, good afternoon. We would like to welcome you all to the third in a series of workshops or webinars following the release of our report, Understanding the Potential of Licensing Frameworks and Teams to Tackle Modern Slavery. I'm pleased to share that the full report is now available on the Shiva Foundation website. So if you haven't already, please do download the report and read through it as you follow along in this webinar. My name is Dami. I'm Senior Program Manager at Shiva Foundation and have been involved in this project from quite early on. As I mentioned in the previous webinar, the first few slides will feel very repetitive if you've been on the call already, so please do bear with us as I share this information yet again for those who are joining us for the very first time. This report builds on Shiva Foundation's experience coordinating the Hertfordshire Modern Slavery Partnership and on the 2022 Self-Assessment Scorecard and Support and Guidance for Local Authorities, which provides practical steps for local authorities to assess their key risk areas of modern slavery, both in their operations but also in their supply chains, as well as other areas of work. The licensing report makes recommendations for strengthening statutory guidance and explores opportunities for licensing authorities and licensing officers, practitioners to utilize tools at their disposal to enhance local anti-modern slavery responses. The report was compiled following a period of extensive evidence gathering from April to August of last year. We conducted roundtables with over 30 stakeholders from across various different local authorities. We included regulatory authorities or regulatory agencies such as the Environment Agency and the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority, as well as 3 other non-statutory partners. Inspiration for this report was also taken from case studies utilizing local licensing frameworks that addressed anti-social behaviour and crime in the nighttime economy. This project was funded by the Home Office through their Modern Slavery Prevention Fund, and we're very grateful to West Sussex Community Safety Team, and I think I've seen at least one of them on this call, for their active involvement in this project, as well as all of the professionals, all of the consultants who contributed to the project to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. We're really grateful, so thank you. Before I get started, just to say that there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So if you do have questions at any point, please do put them in the Q&A function and we will address them towards the ending. Cool. So I thought it might be useful to provide a brief overview of modern slavery, just because I'm aware there are various professionals from various backgrounds on the call, and for those who weren't able to join us in the first 2 webinars, hopefully this will provide a useful background for you all. So modern slavery is an umbrella term that was adopted by the UK government in 2015 to coordinate the prevention and prosecution of 4 major crimes. So that's slavery, human trafficking, forced labour and domestic servitude. And so if you have a chance to read the Act, there are various different manifestations of that. But really the 2 basic elements is firstly, the deception or coercion of an individual, secondly, that deception or coercion is for the purposes of exploitation. So this report focuses mainly on labour exploitation, but we appreciate that other forms of modern slavery can be present on licensed premises. And some examples of that could be that victims might be forced or deceived into working and being controlled by a trafficker who gains financially. Victims might be working long hours without any adequate breaks, or their traffickers might use psychological tactics to control them. Victims might have their passports or other identity documents withheld or forced to pay their wages into someone else's bank account. Or victims might owe a debt to their trafficker because of travel costs, accommodation costs, possibly recruitment costs, and really, these debts are impossible to pay off. It's also important to note that modern slavery exists on a continuum, so from decent work on one end of the spectrum to various labour and other forms of abuse on the other end. So it's really important that we are able to identify exploitation at all stages, because kind of minor labour market infringements might be indicative of more serious abuses that are happening. And also to say that there are some workers, employees and subcontractor staff that might be more vulnerable to exploitation, even though anyone can be a victim. And this could be due to their migration status, whether they are homeless, so they might be rough sleeping, language barriers, as you can imagine, if somebody doesn't understand English, they might find it difficult to access support, or perhaps if they paid recruitment fees, or individuals who lack a social network also might be more vulnerable to exploitation. It also might be useful to talk about the scale of modern slavery. So by 2022, December last year, just under 17,000 people were referred to the National Referral Mechanism. And for those who don't know what the NRM is, it is the UK system for identifying and supporting victims and survivors of modern slavery. So we have about 17,000 people, just under 17,000 people that are referred, so identified as possibly being victims of modern slavery. However, it's estimated that just over 100,000 victims, there are, just over 100,000 victims of modern slavery across the UK by the Centre of Social Justice. So that really means that we are only identifying about 17% of victims, which isn't good. And of those 17,000 or 16,938 victims, 25% were UK nationals, 41% experienced labour exploitation, 14% experienced sexual exploitation, and an estimated 2 million workers are currently in vulnerable employment in the UK. So you can imagine it's touching every aspect of society and across various different businesses, right, and sectors. So this report, we hope, will be well placed to empower licensed businesses to be a part of the solution for this problem. And if you have downloaded the report, you will see that it's separated into three main parts. So you have section 1, which explores how national licensing guidance can be strengthened to prevent modern slavery across the UK. And so that section really contains a list of recommendations for national government. And we're in talks with the Home Office and various other authorities on the possibility of being able to do that. And so section 2 looks at how local councils can update local licensing policies to directly address modern slavery. So section 2 looks at recommendations for really local council leadership on how to do that. And you've got section 3, which focuses on the importance of both raising awareness amongst licensed businesses, building the internal capacity of teams, but also partnership working with law enforcement, which is the focus of today's webinar. And so the third section of the report looks at a list of activities or suggested work that local licensing enforcement teams can undertake to really tackle modern slavery on the ground. Okay, so like I said, as mentioned, the three webinars will focus or has been focusing on section 3 of the report, how local licensing teams can practically confront modern slavery in their daily operations. And that section is split into 3 sections, as I just mentioned, so it's split into 3 further sections. For today's webinar, we'll look more closely at recommendations 16, 17, and 18, which really focuses on partnership working with law enforcement agencies to really disrupt the crime. Okay, so just a bit of background information on information sharing, and I'm sure everyone on this call already knows this already. But information sharing is nationally recognized as an effective way of facilitating successful multi-agency working. And sharing intelligence enables law enforcement professionals to better collaborate and tackle crime. And due to this knowledge, most areas across the UK already have strong pre-existing frameworks for sharing this information. So they might be part of anti-slavery partnerships, or they might be part of serious organized crime meetings. So there's already kind of pre-existing frameworks for sharing this information. Rights Lab, which is based at the University of Nottingham, released a report on anti-slavery partnerships. And in that report, they revealed, at the time of writing it, that over 70% of anti-slavery partnerships are engaged in intelligence sharing between all the partners to that partnership. And during our project, several roundtable participants also mentioned the importance of close working relationships with agencies like the police, the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority, fire and rescue services, health and safety teams as well. because these relationships really help facilitate effective information sharing. A local authority licensing officer also added that, licensing is already well placed to assist in the fight against modern slavery. The key is intelligence sharing, and where licensed businesses are found to be engaging in modern slavery, this needs to be fed back to the local authorities. So there's kind of open doors of communication. By having the relevant law enforcement organizations present to discuss areas or premises of concern, they can work more quickly to deal with offences. And by utilising these forums to work more closely together, resources and capacity can be shared across all of these organizations to really enable the most effective and the quickest, the most efficient response. And so recommendation 16 is centered around this. We found a really great case study of a local authority doing great work in this area. And so recommendation 16 is to establish licensing action groups to regularly review licensing applications and any issues that might be uncovered across any kind of licensed premises. And the case study here is based at the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, who currently run a licensing action group, which reviews new licensing applications and any kind of premise complaints. The representatives who participated in this project said that this forum really is a powerful way to share intelligence, as all responsible agencies, all responsible authorities are invited to this meeting. They discuss premises which might be subject to enforcement action, and then determine the appropriate way to deal with that from a multi-agency perspective. They create action plans, which are often agreed at this meeting, alongside scheduling multi-agency visits. So everyone who could possibly have something to do with this case is all seated around the table. By having the relevant law enforcement organizations present around the table, they can work more quickly to deal with crimes and other causes for concern. And so by using these forums to work more closely together, those resources and capacities that, all those powers that various agencies have can be shared to encourage the most efficient response. Okay, so quickly moving on to, I'm going to jump to recommendation 18 before jumping back to 17 for the purposes of our guest speaker that's going to be speaking soon. Recommendation 18 focuses on slavery and trafficking prevention and risk orders. So before I share a bit more about the context of these civil orders, I wanted to share a quote by one of the contributors on this project, who was able to successfully use one of their orders in their operations. So they said, prevention orders and/or risk orders can be an effective sanction to deter license holders from engaging in modern slavery practices at current or potential future licensed premises as well. So in light of that, recommendation 18 is to encourage the use of prevention and risk orders among licensing teams in collaboration with the relevant law enforcement partners. So to provide a bit of context around what these powers are, there are two civil orders which are available under Part 2 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015, which can be applied to prevent those who pose a risk of harm from committing modern slavery offences in the future. So like I said, there are two civil orders. So the first is the Slavery and Trafficking Prevention Order, which is applied to an individual who's been convicted of a slavery offence or at the point of kind of conviction or sentencing. And then you have the Slavery and Trafficking Risk Order, which is to be applied even if, at the point, even if somebody hasn't been convicted of a slavery offence already. And breach of any of these orders is a criminal offence. So both of the orders can be an effective sanction to deter license holders from engaging in modern slavery practices at current or potential future licensed premises. However, their successful use relies on collaborative efforts with agencies such as the police, the National Crime Agency, Immigration Enforcement, the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority, prevention officers as well, really because they are the ones who have the powers to actually issue these orders or make an application to the court to issue the orders. So by working with these agencies, licensing officers and councils can be instrumental to disrupting modern slavery by working with them to be able to make it happen. And so I wanted to share a case study of its successful implementation. So a car wash that was located in Crawley became a premise of interest to the Crawley and Mid Sussex Serious and Organised Crime Group. This premise had already been visited previously by environmental health officers who reported possible modern slavery indicators present. Considering these concerns, the Crawley and Mid-Sussex SOC group coordinated a multi-agency investigation and a joint operation with the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority and other agencies. So that took place soon after this SOC meeting. During the operation, law enforcement partners found that there were staff who spoke little English on site, but they also were working without kind of PPE. Several health and safety infringements were also identified, along with a few fraud offences as well. And so as a result of these findings, a license that was held by the owner was scheduled for review and revoked. And the revocation was really due to fire and safety violations that had been identified on site. But using all of the information that they gathered, local enforcement agencies then used all of that evidence to apply for a risk order, so a slavery and trafficking risk order against the owner, which was granted. When I was kind of interviewing one of the officers that was involved, he remarked that it was a real success. So he said that it was a real success because it meant that the car wash owner was prevented from employing anyone as a business owner for 5 years. I would not be able to really exploit any more people without facing serious persecutions or repercussions from the court. So it was great kind of opportunity to prevent future risk from happening, at least within the 5-year period that the civil order was granted. Okay, cool. So I'm going to circle back now to recommendation 17, which is to engage in joint visits with other agencies to combat modern slavery. Undertaking joint operations with relevant partners is a really effective way to pool resources, pool capacity, like I mentioned previously. And so by working together with other agencies, we can all make sure that no legal infringements are missed and that the most suitable enforcement body takes the lead to get the best outcomes for the investigation. In that same report that I mentioned by the Rights Lab, they said that just under 55% engage in collaborative enforcement activities with partners. So it's really important to get that number up. Understanding which enforcement body has the power to enter a premises, has the power to enforce certain sanctions is also important for successful disruption of perpetrators. And by working together, licensing reviews can be undertaken and the license can be revoked in cases where modern slavery might be identified during routine inspections. And so at this point, I'd really love to introduce a guest speaker. So Jim, if you're on the call, please do put your camera on. Jim is a regulatory service manager at Brighton and Hove, covering a range of functions, including licensing, trading standards, and environmental health. As well as being a member of the Institute of Licensing, Jim is a chartered environmental health practitioner. He joined Brighton and Hove in 1997, working in environmental health before joining licensing in 2008, covering all aspects of licensing, before becoming a regulatory service manager in 2018. Jim has chaired the East and West Sussex Licensing Liaison Group, as well as the Council's Safety Advisory Group. And so he'll be sharing a bit more about the great work that they've done in their area. And some of the really great successes that are both noted in the report, but also some other examples that he will share with us. So Jim, over to you. I'll stop sharing so you can share your slides and we can take it from there.
Thanks very much, Danny. So yes, my presentation is around partnership working, mainly about licensing, but also touching on some other sides of regulatory services. Just quickly, a little bit about Brighton and Hove. We are a city by the sea, population approaching 300,000, which increases massively from day trippers and staying visitors. We have a large student population. And what's quite unique about Brighton and Hove as a coastal town or city is that we have a higher than national average of young people, which is quite different from the large retirement age population that you normally associate with many coastal towns, particularly along the south coast. We're very reliant on the nighttime economy. We have quite a large proportion of population work in the leisure industry, which is one of those sectors that can be associated with modern slavery. And that nighttime economy is so important for any town or city centre, but it does present challenges in terms of, we have significant alcohol and substance misuse, homelessness issues, but at the same time, it's vital in terms of the tourism and culture offer that Brighton has. So in terms of licensing, and I think there are some licensing colleagues on the call, but so bear with me if you know this already, but I'll just go through some of the basics. Licensing is fundamentally about public protection. It applies to all areas of licensing, so alcohol and entertainment, gambling, taxis, street trading, sex establishments, and skin piercing. And safeguarding is clearly of vital importance to all members of society, and the failures over the past are all too apparent, and none more so that were illustrated by the shocking revelations in the public inquiry into child sexual exploitation within the taxi licensing industry in towns such as Rotherham. But licensing is a key tool to obstruct and disrupt modern slavery, including sexual exploitation of children and vulnerable adults. So we as a licensing authority regulate the issue and compliance of licenses for all these areas. Every one of those areas could be used for modern slavery, whether that's exploitation of vulnerable persons or children to commit criminal activities or be the victim of criminal activities through poor working conditions or human trafficking. And that really does go the same across regulatory services for areas such as trading standards and environmental health. And underpinning the Licensing Act, which includes alcohol, entertainment and late night refreshment, are the 4 licensing objectives. And you can see how these can tie in and relate to modern slavery, particularly prevention of crime disorder and the protection of children from harm. And these objectives are key in any decision making that we as the licensing authority make. So just corporately as a council, we have a number of policies that relate to modern slavery. There's no statutory duty to prevent modern slavery, but there is a statutory duty for first responders to refer victims to the Home Office as part of the national referral mechanism that Danny spoke about. We have an anti-slavery pledge on our website, which includes socially responsible procurement strategies, and we've set up anti-slavery networks both regionally and within the city, which involve multi-agency partners. And then we have our statement of licensing policy, which every authority is required to have, and that sets out the functions of the licensing authority and informs businesses of what we would expect and require in terms of licensing. And that's an area we're looking to update in terms of modern slavery, which is one of the recommendations of the Shiva report. So Danny touched on partnership working, and the Brighton Hove licensing team's approach to tackling modern slavery, which will be similar to a lot of other local authorities we've heard about, Hammersmith and Fulham, is much like any other regulatory issue, whether it be safeguarding, underage sales, or any breach of licensing conditions. The key thing is working in partnership with key stakeholders to share intelligence and gather evidence. So we have a fortnightly joint intelligence meeting where we share issues with licensing premises with teams across reg services, police, immigration and fire. And this works really well and leads to a coordinated approach to problem premises. We also have a JAG, or a joint action group, which is a more strategic, wider multi-agency group that meets once a month and deals with crime and antisocial hotspots antisocial behaviour hotspots in the city. We have various training and raising awareness exercises where we work jointly with police licensing. So that's, as well as we train our first responder council staff, those staff that are on the ground interacting with the public and industry, visiting premises in the entertainment and leisure sector, and raising awareness around county lines, getting involved in regional and national initiatives such as Operation Make Safe, which was a national initiative to raise awareness of child sexual exploitation in the hotel and leisure industry. And that was really about making sure that staff knew about the early warning signs and how to report them. We also raise awareness around county lines, where urban gangs supply drugs to coastal towns, using children and vulnerable people to move drugs and money around, as well as having safeguarding training for taxi drivers. So as well as the support we give businesses, we carry out more enforcement-minded operations. And these are joint operations where we'll target a particular group of premises where we've received intelligence, say, so this could be takeaways, hotels, B&Bs, off licenses, and we have a multi-agency team with teams across regulatory services such as training standards and licensing, police, fire and immigration, and could involve test purchase exercises, because we know that these sectors, such as hotels and B&Bs, are often used to exploit and abuse victims. And the premises license holder has a responsibility to have suitable control measures in place under those licensing objectives that I spoke about before. So one of the joint operations that involved takeaways ended up with 3 premises being fined by immigration 15,000, and 2 were fined 10,000 for employing individuals with no rights to work. We also do the joint routine inspections, and often these are carried out by council and police licensing together. And we'll go through the conditions of the license, looking at the CCTV and refusal incident books, staff training. The officers, because they've had the first responder training, should be able to discuss safeguarding issues and look for those red flag signs. You know, are the staff really fearful? Are they avoiding eye contact? Do they just not engage? Do they have any ID? And this has led to discovering modern slavery issues. So one of the key protections for communities that the Licensing Act brought in was the ability for anyone to call for a review of a premises license where problems arise with that license once it's been granted. And we deal with between 6 and 12 reviews a year, normally around noise or antisocial behaviour or crime. But I wanted just to highlight 3 where there was evidence of modern slavery. You know, that might be withholding documents, excessive hours, restricted movement, or debt bondage. And it's worth mentioning that where you do have immigration issues, it's often indicative of other criminality going on, whether that be illicit alcohol, tobacco, breach of conditions, organised crime groups, or sexual assaults, and vice versa. Often where officers have found issues of those nature, they'll then find immigration issues as well. So in order to, when somebody calls a review, and that's in our case often one of the responsible authorities like the police, there's a 28-day consultation period, and after that period, a hearing is held by the licensing authority to determine the outcome. And that's in front of a panel of 3 licensing committee members with the applicant for the review, so say the police, any representations, and the licensing holder. And that panel has a range of powers, from everything from doing nothing right through to revocation. So for the 3 reviews where modern slavery featured, we had 2 convenience stores and 1 restaurant. And the 2 convenience stores was as a result of intelligence from the Home Office, and the restaurant was a result of the sexual assault that took place, and those issues were modern slavery issues were subsequently discovered. We often get intelligence of modern slavery from the Home Office Immigration or the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority, and in this case they'd identify possible victims of modern slavery at these newsagents. So we set up multi-agency visits with the police and their vulnerable persons team, fire and council licensing. And what we found was staff were living at the rear of the premises on mattresses on the floor. They were working 13 hours a day for £2 an hour. They had no right to work documentation. All their documents had been taken away by the license holder, and they were being threatened with deportation. There were debt bondage inflated loans having to be paid back. In one case, the license holder had paid for the victim's mother to have medical treatment. So essentially, they were being financially exploited and controlled or coerced to work with the threat of debt and deportation. And then there were some licensing breaches also that were discovered. So this led to the police arresting the license holder on suspicion of holding a person in slavery or servitude, and referral to the immigration for offences and to consider serving a civil penalty. The fire service, they served a prohibition notice for no sleeping on the premises, and council licensing picked up the breaches of premises licence, and also ultimately the police applied to review the premises licence. I should say that victims were offered support and safe housing. So the police applied for the review on the basis that the licence holder was failing to promote the licensing objective of prevention of crime disorder, in that they were employing staff with no right to work. These staff were being exploited and working below minimum wage, and there were a number of breaches of premises licence conditions. The review was supported by the fire service, who had served that prohibition notice, and also the Home Office Immigration Enforcement Section and council licensing. So it's up to the licensing panel to consider the evidence, and ultimately their decision must be based on those licensing objectives, the council's own licensing policy, and government licensing guidance, which is called Section 182 guidance. And I just wanted to highlight 3 paragraphs from that guidance that are relevant to modern slavery. So 2.6 talks about the prevention of crime, that licensing objective, including the prevention of immigration crime. And then there are 2 sections that are under the review section of the guidance. 11.27 lists certain criminal activity that should be treated particularly seriously, and that includes employing a person who's disqualified from work by reason of their immigration status. And then it goes on in 11.28 to say that revocation in the first instance should be seriously considered if any one of those activities that are listed in 11.27 occurs. So in all cases, the licenses were revoked by the licensing panel. So I've got a couple more slides, and I just wanted to touch on a couple more areas of licensing and regulatory services where we've done partnership working, and that's been used to prevent modern slavery. So taxis, we obviously issue and regulate taxi licensing, and before I got involved with taxi licensing, I never really appreciated, but taxis are in such a unique position of trust in the community. They provide a vital service in transporting people, including vulnerable people, around the city, and they have this unique reach into society. They're often not seen. No one bats an eyelid if a taxi passes them in the middle of the night. And they operate under that radar, and for that reason, they're often used by criminals for transporting drugs and drug dealers, for courier fraud and county lines activities, all victims of abuse. And like many licensing authorities, we've revoked a number of licenses for all three of those reasons. So we work very closely with the police and taxi drivers, because essentially drivers can be the eyes and ears for protection agencies, picking up on where abuses may be taking place. There's mandatory safeguarding training for taxi drivers, where those red flags or signs of abuse are taught, and how they should report that. We've recently been involved with an operation called Operation Recover, which was around courier fraud with use of taxis, and where couriers who could be victims of county line or modern slavery activity are utilising taxis from train stations to collect valuables and cash from victims. So we've provided leaflets and training videos to the taxi trade, to make drivers aware that they may be used for this purpose and how to report. And then another area is trading standards, where we work closely with the police, investigating issues of, say, illicit tobacco or alcohol or road trading. And they've found evidence of modern slavery and human trafficking. So we might get intelligence around illicit tobacco or a road trader, and a subsequent joint investigation with police highlights modern slavery evidence. So it could be mattresses on the floors, different people's passports being held. We had one recently where someone's driveway was being worked on, and they were concerned. If officers visited, they found high levels of alcohol and drug items on site, and there were red flag signs of the labourers being victims of modern slavery, and for that reason referrals were made under the national referral mechanism. So that's it really. I've tried to just give a few examples where, as a result of partnership working, the majority of which is with the police, but does include immigration, fire and other council teams, where we can take action to prevent modern slavery. And there's still lots to do. I hadn't touched on street trading and sex establishments and gambling, where there are areas where vulnerable people can be exploited. But the key thing, I think, to get across is that of setting up formal multi-agency partnerships. Often multi-agency working is a lot to do with personalities, and you just click with someone in the police, and you get a really good rapport going. The danger is when that person moves on, which happens quite a lot within the police, that relationship's broken down. So you need to really formalise those partnerships and data sharing agreements. We've obviously also worked jointly in raising awareness, and we're looking at updating our policies with reference to modern slavery. It's just worth reiterating really that licensing and regulatory staff in general are in an excellent position, both to pick up on signs of modern slavery and to raise awareness. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. And apologies for the tech difficulties and sharing of the screens and all that kind of stuff. It's not really a webinar until something tech fails. So thank you for powering through, and everyone for being patient with us as well. So I do have a question, and I think it's linked to your final point about personalities and how working with professionals sometimes is based on whether you click with someone else in the space that's part of another agency. And you also spoke a little bit about formalizing the agreements. I was wondering if you can talk a bit more about the process involved with formalizing that agreement. Was there kind of a ways of working document that was involved, and how you went about kind of formalizing those partnerships so that the good work can continue even after people have left?
Yeah, sure. I think so. So, for example, we have a joint intelligence meeting where partners from across various agencies meet fortnightly. It's important to agree a terms of reference with those partners, and to have that signed off by all members of the group. Inevitably, you do make relations with partners in different teams, and it's always quite disappointing when those colleagues move on and you have to start again. But if you've got that written down and agreement and signed off, there's less chance of all that good work sort of drifting away and being lost.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I was wondering if you can say a bit more about the Operation Recover and the impact of leaflets, and raising the awareness of some license holders, whether that's in relation to this operation or other operations. Have you seen a significant kind of impact following those activities?
I can't really, I wouldn't be able to comment on the impact, if I'm honest, Dami. It was I don't know if it's a national one, but certainly Sussex and Surrey Police led on it here.
Yeah.
And I know all the local authorities have joined in and shared all the videos and the messaging that they've put out. And equally, when we've had taxi forums, we reiterate that message. So I just think, it's a really useful thing, because the taxi drivers, they are the eyes and ears on the street.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're working 24 hours a day, so they are often used for illicit purposes. So to get them on board is so important.
Right. Thank you so much, Jim, for that really, really, really informative presentation. And I think to ground a lot of the work that has gone into the report in really practical examples of great things that kind of, councils and organizations, licensing teams, enforcement teams are doing across the UK. So thank you so much for your time. And you'll see a few of kind of the contributions that Jim has made and his team in the report as well. So that's been really, really, really useful. So if there's no more questions, there's still an opportunity to ask a few. I think we might have one. Okay, so that's the one I just read out. Then we can bring this webinar to an end. It will be recorded, so you can share widely with all of your other teams members as well. So please do that. And if you have any questions related to the report or related to the work that's gone on regarding this report, please do reach out. And I see someone in the chat saying they're interested in the national government response as well. Our recommendations on that section of the report is also featured in the first section of the report. So really, really exciting work. So thank you so much, Jim, and everyone that's contributed. I've seen kind of Kate in the chat as well. She contributed widely, and all the other agencies that contributed. So thank you so much. But if you have any questions related to anything, please do feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.